This was my dog, Sebastian. This little tiny man got me through some of the darkest and most isolated years of my life. He was my tiny shadow. He came to work with me, he hung out in my purse when I went shopping, he slept in my bed, I made him tiny food for dinner every night. We could communicate so well that when he wanted something, I could list options and he would sneeze when I said the right one.
Do you need to go on a walk? Do you need a toy?
He got cancer about 2 years ago and I had to put him down. And I still remember what losing him felt like in my body. It felt like I got punched in the stomach and had the wind knocked out of me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't focus. My life unexpectedly changed drastically in a way that I didn't want it to, and there was nothing that I could do about it. Grief is the emotional and physical pain that we experience when we lose something that we love. We often associate grief with death, but grief can be a response to anything that mattered to us being gone. We grieve when our relationships end. We grieve when we get a diagnosis. We grieve when our parents get older. We grieve when we don't have the future that we thought we would have. We grieve a parent who is still alive but isn't who we need them to be. Every single one of us will grieve repeatedly throughout our lifetimes. But grief isn't bad. The experience of grief is part of what it costs to love anything or to have hope. None of us are going to get through a life without grieving, which means that knowing how to grieve in a way that fits you matters. I grieve my little Sebi by talking about him and sometimes crying about him. Even me talking about him right now in this video is me connecting with my own grief. I process by talking and sharing. I wore waterproof mascara today because I know that crying is a very real possibility whenever I talk too much about Sebastian, and I'm fine with that. I'm okay with sharing my grief, but I am not okay with my makeup bleeding and looking like a raccoon in a video. I am a trauma therapist by day, so a lot of my work is helping people through their grief. But here's what I noticed in my practice and what eventually led me to the conversation that I am so excited to share with you guys today. The way that our culture talks about grief and the way that many therapists have been trained to recognize and work with grief often doesn't fit everyone. Specifically, it often doesn't fit with men or with people who heal more in a masculine style. The masculine process of healing from grief is something that many of us haven't been taught to see. In my therapy training, I never really learned how to support people who heal in a more masculine way. Sometimes I'd work with men, and talking and processing verbally worked so well. But with other men, when I tried to talk with them about their grief, it generally led to a lot of awkward silences, and we didn't really get very far. So I went looking in the literature to try to figure out what was going on. And the explanation that I found for this was generally like, well, men, they have toxic masculinity. They've been socialized not to express vulnerability because vulnerability is coded as feminine. The literature kind of alluded to the idea that there was some implied defiance going on. But the men that I was working with were not defiant. I could tell that they were not choosing not to talk about their feelings. These were men who wanted to feel better and were willing to do whatever it took, but I could sense that there was a block between us, and there was something happening in that dynamic that I wasn't understanding. I knew that unless I understood what was happening between me and many of my male clients, I wasn't going to be able to serve them well. So I went looking in the literature for something better, and I found something great. I found the work of Juan Goodman, a therapist who has spent decades studying how men grieve. Specifically, this is the book that cracked the case wide open for me. Here is the core of one of his really important frameworks. There is a feminine and a more masculine style of healing. The feminine side is more verbal and relational. It looks like me grieving Sebastian by talking about him and crying about him in the company of friends and family and subscribers. The masculine side tends to be more action-oriented. It looks more like building or dedicating yourself to a cause or throwing yourself into a project. And obviously, of course, men and women can engage in either. Feminine and masculine are just one way to label these modes. You could also call them more verbal and relational or embodied and active. The labels matter less than the underlying observation. People heal differently, and our culture really only is literate in understanding the feminine style. Learning how to understand both will help you recognize and support the men in your life and support anyone who heals more through action. This is a conversation that I had with Juan Goodman about male grief. He is a pioneering researcher on masculine grief with international recognition and the author of 2 wonderful books about the masculine side of healing, Swallowed by a Snake and The Way Men Heal. I genuinely think these books should be required reading for anyone who wants to be emotionally supportive to the men in their life. His phenomenal books, his YouTube, and his Substack are linked below. Early in his career, he realized the same thing that I did, which is that mainstream therapy was missing something fundamental about how men grieve and the masculine mode of grieving. So he went looking at how other cultures have been doing it for thousands of years.
One of the first things that hit me, Gabby, was the cross-cultural research.
Mm.
You know, the anthropological cross-cultural research on indigenous tribes.
Mm.
And it just changed my mind. I just went, oh my gosh, because this cross-cultural research just showed over and over and over and over again that when men are in grief in these tribes, the tribe will give them things to do. They'll give them actions to use. They'll give the women a place to emote, a place to talk. And the more I saw that, the more I thought, holy crap, of course that's right. And guess what's happening in our culture? We've subcontracted all of the things to do. So men are left with nothing. They're left tapping their foot in a funeral home. They'd much rather be building the coffin or taking care of the guests, which is what these indigenous men would do. They'd build the coffin, they'd dig the grave, they'd do all kinds of activities that were around the grief, around the death. And through the activities, the grief starts to resonate. Because that's what you want. You want the grief to resonate. And when women talk to each other, they resonate the grief. Because this is all about story. It's all about story. And so telling your story verbally is moving to a place where that story becomes a verbal piece. That verbal piece then resonates the pain within. The pain comes up and it becomes then slowly a part of you rather than something that's outside of you that's banging on you. The men will use activity to do the very same thing. They'll use an action to be able to resonate that story within and then bring that story within them rather than something that's outside beating them. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense.
And that's what I saw over and over again. Once I saw that cross-cultural research, I started thinking, okay, don't ask him how he's feeling. Ask him what he's doing. You know, and as soon as I started asking men what they were doing, things opened up.
Right.
And then the trick with therapists out there, talk about what the man is doing, not about what he's feeling. It's so simple. You just talk about what he's doing, and when he'll gladly talk about that. And guess what happens when he talks about it? The emotions pour out. The emotions just pour out. He's in the middle. Gosh, you know, when my father died, my brother and I made the box for his ashes, right? And we invited his friends in. His friends came in, and so it was my brother and myself. We told them stories about you know, when we were younger, and they told us stories about recently what he was doing and all kinds of shenanigans. And boy, there was plenty of tears on the floor in that workshop, right? But we had a good time making that box together. You know, we were all, it's a masculine place. You know, oh, come on, sand that a little better over there, right? I mean, that's just the way men are. That's the way we work, and that makes us happy. But now take that same group of men, put them in the living room, put them in a circle, and say, how are you feeling about Tom's father's death? What would happen? Nothing would happen. You know, it would be very uncomfortable because they're not feeling safe. We found safety around building that box together. Anybody finds safety for grief. Women find safety in interaction. Men find safety in shoulder-to-shoulder action of one kind or another.
Once I could see through this new lens, I realized that all around me were examples of the masculine mode of healing. About 20 years ago, someone in my community died unexpectedly and tragically. And every year since, my family plays in a golf tournament held in his honor. 20 years of the community showing up on a specific weekend to play 18 holes in remembrance of someone in our community. I think that if I went around and asked any of those participants, "Hello, are you here to integrate your grief?" they probably would say no. They're just at the tournament. They're competing. They're laughing at a bad shot. But that tournament is a ritual of grief. It has been every year for 20 years. Men might not always have the chance to build the ash box like Tom and his brothers, but I can think of so many examples of people taking over responsibility in honor of someone who has passed. the son who keeps his dad truck running and in great shape for 15 years after his dad's passing, the friend who shows up to take the widow to her doctor's appointment, the uncle who becomes a second father to a niece whose own father is gone. None of these men, I don't think, if you ask them, would be like, I'm grieving. They would say like, no, I'm just doing what needs to be done. But their grief transforms into the responsibility that they choose to accept. That's the masculine mode of healing in real life. It's not avoidance, it's not doing something to distract themselves, it's just grief in a different language. And it's a language that many of us don't understand.
I'm telling you, I have guys come in to see me sometimes. And I'll say, well, what are you doing here? What's going on? And he'll say, well, my wife says I'm not grieving. You know? And so he's convinced. He's convinced that he's not grieving. And so first session is helping him understand, you got a different way, boss. And she's not going to see it because women do not see this usually. Their eyes are not open to it. And so they think that it should only be like her, you know, like the way she does it. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you like me? And he's got a very different way, you know, and finding that way is the work of therapy. And then once you find that way, then you honor the person for that and you help them facilitate it and make it bigger, make it stronger, you know. That's kind of the work of therapy is really finding out where a person's gift is.
Finding your gift, finding the way that you move through grief matters, because experiencing grief without knowing the way through feels and looks a lot like darkness that never ends. When you are experiencing intense grief, you lose perspective. It feels like you're stuck somewhere that you are never going to get out of. Tom has a metaphor for that, and it's one of the best descriptions of grief that I've come across.
It comes from an old folk tale, and I think it's South American folk tale, about a guy being swallowed by a snake and what he did to get out. And what he did was he took a chunk out of the belly over and over and over again, kept taking these chunks. And the whole time he's in there, he's thinking, I'm never getting out of this place. I'm never getting out of this because it's completely dark. He's cut off from all the things he usually does. He can't move very well, right? All he can do is convince himself that he's got to cut. And the snakes tell him all the time, just lie down and be digested. Just lie down and be digested. This is grief. And a big grief. It's like we're cut off from everything. It's like the grief is telling us, you're never getting out of this. You're never going to get any better than this. Just screw it. Just turn off. Just relax, you know? And that's the clear story that people get. And so the metaphor of the story, or the point of the story, is that when you take a chunk out of the belly each time, and he ate the chunks, by the way, he would eat the chunks of the snake's belly. And so what's the grief is nurturing you, as you go along. It's nurturing you. It's giving you sustenance. And also, after a while, you're going to poke through. You're going to poke through the stomach and poke through the skin, and then you're going to get out. But it's a matter of just knowing that each bite will take you a little closer. Because grief will tell you over and over again, you're not getting out of this. This is going to be a forever kind of thing. And in some ways it is, but in most ways it's not. You know, and so that story kind of helps people to see that, yeah, I just need to keep cracking at it. Because the way through grief, or the way out of grief is through it. You know, you got to go through it first, and then you can get out the other side. And getting through it means take a little bite one at a time. And everyone has such a different way of taking a bite. You know, that's when I work with people, the first session really is trying to figure out what their way is. You know,
the way out of grief is through it, one bite at a time. But here's what I keep coming back to. In the cultures that Tom is describing, the tribes gave their grieving men work to do and their grieving women places to talk. Nobody was eating the snake alone. The tribe handed you the tools and they gave you a path because the tribe knew how to grieve, because they've been grieving together for generations. We don't live in those cultures anymore. Most of us live in something close to the exact opposite of that. We are atomized. We grieve in isolation, in our apartments, in our cars on the way to work, in the shower, and in the quiet after everyone has gone to bed. The tribe that knew how to handle grief has been scattered. So that means that we have to go the extra mile to be supportive to one another. And being a tribe member to the people in our lives means learning what their process of healing actually looks like, not what we think it should look like. I think about tribe a lot differently now because humans are still tribal and we need a tribe. So I've just expanded my definition. Because the people that I learn from and am inspired by are not only the friends and family who I see often. Tom was a member of my tribe, even though we'd never met until this conversation. He spent decades figuring out what our culture forgot, and he wrote it down so other clinicians like myself could find it. His books changed how I work with men and those who heal in a more masculine style, and he's an important member of my tribe. And I get to be a tribe member to my clients by helping them find the orientation they need. And if they heal in a more masculine way, helping them find the project, the practice, or the way of moving that lets them start eating the snake. Sometimes that means that I'm not even in the room with them while they're processing. They're in their workshop, or they're in their kitchen, or they're out walking, and they're texting me their insights. It's like long distance, shoulder to shoulder. That is us working together as a tribe. And if you are watching this, and there is a man in your life who is grieving, you can be his tribe. Maybe that isn't by asking him how he's feeling and waiting for tears. Maybe that means noticing what he's working on, or sitting nearby while he works on his project. Maybe it means encouraging him to get back to his woodshop or back to his softball league. Maybe it looks like recognizing that him leaning towards quiet and solitude might be his version of processing, and it might not be in his best interest to pull him out of it, but to make sure that he knows he's not alone in it. Our tribes might look different now. They're often long distance, but humans are still tribal animals, and we heal best in groups. That is what many of us have lost, and that is what we can choose to find in other ways. We just need to be a little bit more creative.
Which reminds me of the story of the Dagura people in Africa. I think it's the Dagura. When a child is born, the elders gather together and they decide what gift the child is bringing to the tribe. They go into a trance, basically, and decide what gift the child is bringing to the tribe, right? And then when the child gets to be a certain age, they have to report to the elders what gift they're bringing to the tribe. And if they get it wrong, they got to go back and figure it out, But here, listen to the difference. This group thinks that everyone has a gift, Everyone has a gift, and you're bringing it to us. You're bringing in this gift to us. What a different way of viewing the world, And as therapists, we need to think about that. We need to think about this person's bringing a gift. This person has a very different way, a unique way of processing things. How can I find out what their way is? Not, how are they more like me today? It's like, oh, God, give it a rest. And people respond to this too. When you really listen, when you really want to learn about their way of doing things, they respond like crazy, Yeah, because they're being themselves. That's what you want.
That is such a beautiful insight. Here is something that's been on my mind a lot since this conversation with Tom. We talk so often about post-traumatic stress in our culture. We talk about the pain of childhood and the pain of adulthood. We talk about how pain affects us and leaves marks on our bodies and our nervous systems that can take years to heal. All of that is true. I work with it every day. But we very seldom talk about post-traumatic growth. And by only talking about post-traumatic stress and never talking about post-traumatic growth, we're leaving out the best part of the whole story. To access post-traumatic growth, we have to learn how to move through grief. We have to find our gift. All of us grieve differently. I have fully eaten my way out of the snake that swallowed me when Sebastian died. And that snake is fully digested. The gift of grief for me has been that I am no longer afraid of emotional pain, which means that I can sit with people while they are in theirs. The ability for me to witness suffering without shutting down is an amazing gift. There is always a beautiful gift at the end of grief if we can make our way out of our snake. Some of the most beautiful things in this human life, wisdom, empathy, finding the gift that you bring to the tribe, come out of the ground that pain and loss broke open. Grief is painful, but it's also really cool. Grief is one of the few experiences powerful enough to actually change how you live. It can help us decide what is actually important to us. People who grieve well often reprioritize their lives. Grief forces us to decide what actually matters. When people know how to grieve well, they create a ripple effect and become a lighthouse for the people who are suffering around them. They teach people how to live well through their example. Men in our culture, and those who heal in a more masculine style, often have to do this work without anyone teaching them what they're doing or how they should work through it. They speak a language of grief and healing that most of us were never taught to understand. They go quiet, and we call it avoidance. They throw themselves into work, and we say they're running from their feelings. We're missing it. Tom realized that men were speaking a language that many of us weren't understanding, so he dedicated himself to learning it and translating it for the rest of us. And it just so happens that he's an amazing translator. If you find yourself in a snake right now, I hope that you start eating. Whatever your way is, find it and start moving through it. Snake meat can be very chewy and tough, but I promise that there is something on the outside of the snake that is worth getting to. Once again, these books are both wonderful. They've helped me so much in the work that I do with men, and I highly recommend both of them. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Tom for sharing his expertise. Would you mind just telling everybody a little bit about like some of your projects, what you're working on, where they can find you, all that good stuff?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I'm like that little video I did today on the manosphere. And
Yes.
I love doing those with AI. It's really fun to do. But I'm doing that. I'm putting a couple of books together slowly but slowly. And the Substack is keeping a lot of my time. And I love that Understanding Men section. You know, I was in the hospital, I guess 3 years ago now. I had an aortic aneurysm, an abdominal aortic aneurysm, which 90% of people die from it, right?
Oh my God.
So I was in ICU for like 2 weeks. And while I was laying there, it came to me, one of the things you haven't done, Golden, is you haven't put together an easy place for people to see the reality of masculinity, what it really is, not what Division 51 says it is. And I said, okay, I'm doing that. And it took me a year after that, and I finally got it up on the Substack. But I love that place because it really tells the story about the reality of research and masculinity, not the media-driven crap you're going to see. You know, it talks about moral typecasting, it talks about the hierarchy, it talks about testosterone. Oh, there's so many things about testosterone. It's so incredible. You know, we learned a lot about testosterone from the trans men, which were biological women who took huge doses of testosterone. And then they talk about what that did to their emotions, what it did to their capacity to articulate. And they say the same thing. They say, I couldn't articulate anything. I was stuck. Couldn't, and their tears dry up. The testosterone dries up tears. So women judge men on how many tears they shed, right? Well, guess what? That's not a good idea because the man's testosterone slows those tears down. That's why when a man is very sad, you'll see his eyes glaze over. You'll see the tear maybe start to form in his eye, but you don't see it drip down. You know, that's because testosterone is slowing down that drip, slowing down those tears, all kinds of things like that that make men very unique and very different. And you'll find out about all those things if you go to that section of the Substack, which I love dearly. You know,
Amazing, absolutely. Hey, this was so great. Thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate your time.
Gabby, it's been fun. It's fun to be with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon.
We'll see you.
Bye.